by actually teaching kids how to think, not what to think, then what they're doing is creating both the habits of what you need, the skills of what you need as an adult, dealing with conflict, also the habits of pluralism and the muscle of being able to discern fact from fiction, being able to actually understand if a policymaker is saying X versus Y and you want X, then you say, okay, I'm going with this policymaker, I'm going with this elected official because I want that X. And that's why fascists fear teachers.
Hello and welcome to Always Learning. My guest today needs no introduction. Randi Weingarten doesn't just talk about public education. She's been in the trenches fighting for it. A former lawyer turned high school teacher turned president of the 1.7 million member American Federation of Teachers. Randi's the kind of leader who will walk the picket line and then masterfully debate policy on live TV without breaking a sweat. She's known for taking on billion-dollar reformers, defending teachers, and stirring the pot when it comes to what real educational justice looks like. Whether you love her, fear her, or both, you can't ignore her voice in the national conversation about schools, labor, and democracy. She's also allegedly the most dangerous person in the world, so this conversation might be spicy. Today, we're chatting about Randi's new book, Why Fascists Fear Teachers, which warns that the coordinated attacks on public education and teachers are part of a broader plan to undermine truth, opportunity, and democracy itself by silencing those who foster critical thinking and informed citizenship. Welcome, Randi, and thank you so much for taking the time to be here today.
Oh my God, thank you, Lisa. And I am in an airport right now because we were just with Letitia James, the Attorney General from New York, really supporting her after after she pleaded not guilty to what we believe is pretty made up charges.
Right. Excellent.
So my apologies for being in an airport.
Oh, no problem. We can do this anywhere.
Thank you.
So I think I've been reading your new book and it is fantastic. And I first will say that as a former teacher, I love being associated so positively with the fight for democracy and the fight to save schools. And the first thing I'd say is that you open the book with this incredible story about Norwegian teachers resisting the Nazis with the paperclip. Why did that story resonate so deeply for you right now? And why did you choose that story to set the tone?
So, Lisa, first off, thank you for this. Thank Chris for doing this work, and thank you for the interview. And for teaching. I I I heard the story about the Norwegian teachers and the resistance to the Nazi occupation probably about 20 years ago, and I was really struck by it then, and I used it as the opening story. Not because I think we are in a Nazi occupation. I do not think that. I am writing a warning to actually stop us from ever getting to that moment. So all those conservatives or all those right-leaning extremists who are trying to put words in my mouth, you write a warning to try to never get there, you know? But what I loved about the story, which is why I used it, was the combination, the twinning of community and education. That what these teachers did in the face of oppression, in the face of laws that said they could not wear any political buttons, they could not talk about the king anymore, there was just political repression. What they did is they wore, and this is in the 40s, so they wore a paperclip to connote binding people together like binding pieces of paper together. But the story doesn't end there. What started happening was that young people started wearing paperclips and paperclip necklaces and paperclip bracelets, as young people do. They started creating some joy around it. So it was community and education. It started asking that a paperclip, then people started asking questions. Why are you wearing it? We're bringing community together. So it was education and community. And the Nazis actually freaked out, and they tried to force teachers into a Nazi organization. There are 14,000 teachers in Norway at the time. 12,000 of them would not go into the Nazi um, uh, organization, the basically the indoctrination organization. And and then they closed schools. And then parents were like, what are you closing schools for? So parents were getting involved, community was getting involved. So it showed the power of education and community together, the power of what it meant to oppose oppression and the use of symbols to actually do that work for us.
Hmm. Makes me think of some of the teachers today that are refusing to take books off shelves, or making loud statements in their classrooms with what they hang or refuse to take down, doing that same kind of thing. So we're seeing it very much mirrored the same kind of tactics and the same kind of pushback.
I mean,
Um,
think about, for example, that teacher from Idaho, where she had a poster in her classroom. I think it was Idaho. That's very similar to posters I've seen in countless classrooms, with hands, white hands and black hands and, and brown hands, and basically saying we're together and we welcome you. And was told that that poster was political, as
mhm.
opposed to you're creating an environment that says every single one of your diverse student population is welcome in your classroom. And so that's what when we're saying that teachers are resisting, that is about basic humanity. That's about basic dignity. And we used to believe, when I heard that story 20 years ago, we were still a nation of immigrants that believed that diversity was our strength, not our weakness. That we welcome the stranger. That when you think about the two big cases in American education law, the twin cases are about um, uh, education must not separate is not equal, and our undocumented students are welcomed in our classrooms. Those two anchors are the anchors of American education law under the Constitution of the United States of America. And so, what is a teacher supposed to do? Follow what the United States Supreme Court has said, or the kind of bullying that's going on right now to try to disrupt the pluralism and the community building and the critical thinking that teachers do each and every day.
Exactly, exactly. And it's and I really enjoyed especially the first chapter of your book, because I was also a social studies teacher and a civics teacher. So getting into some of those the lessons that are there and how difficult it is for us to teach the concepts that we know to be true and right, with the kind of the pushback that is out there right now. And you frame teachers as defenders of democracy in your book. And why do you think it's so threatening to the leaders of authoritarian movements that teachers take on this role?
Because kids and their families actually being able to discern fact from fiction is really threatening to an autocrat. Actually questioning authority. Remember that button we used to wear? Question authority. I mean, who knew? Who knew that that was political? We just thought it was rebellious. But the underlying point in all of this is agency. And if you think about, and you know this as well as I do, if you think about autocratic governments from, kings, monarchs, dictators, you know, both left wing and right wing fascism. If you think about what they want the rule of one, not the rule of law. And how do they enforce that, particularly since the population is normally still much, much bigger than any kind of um, enforcement agency many of these strong men have. They enforce it in three ways. One, through fear. Two, through isolation. And three, through apathy. And so if you actually are, I'm sorry, and four, kind of through ignorance. So it's fear, apathy, isolation, ignorance. So if you're a teacher with students and students are actually saying, no, I, I want to actually learn more about what you're doing, even if they agree with the strongman, but they say, I want to learn more. I want to understand this. The strongman doesn't want that. They want blind obedience. And so critical thinking goes right up against ignorance, fear, apathy. May not go against isolation, but what goes against isolation is if you have a school that welcomes all folks and you create the kind of safe and welcoming classrooms to campuses, then what's happening is you're bringing community together. It's the opposite of isolation. It's the opposite of apathy. So the techniques that an autocratic leader who's relying on being a strongman is doing is pretty much the opposite of what teachers do every single day. So most teachers, don't get up in the morning or get up when they were in, teaching college and say, I am going to be a defender of democracy. I don't think most of my members, maybe before Donald Trump actually would have said that. But what they do is they teach the habits of democracy by creating a welcoming and safe classroom, by creating agency, by actually teaching kids how to think, not what to think, then what they're doing is creating both the habits of what you need, the skills of what you need as an adult, the dealing with conflict, but also the habits of pluralism and the muscle of being able to discern fact from fiction, being able to actually understand if a policymaker is saying X versus Y, and you want X, then you say, okay, I'm going with this policymaker, I'm going with this elected official because I want that X.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
And that's
absolutely.
why fascists fear teachers, because they fear that we are creating the muscle and the habits of democracy, which are both pluralism and critical thinking.
And that's our job. That's what we're
Exactly.
there for. And while the fascists fear teachers, teachers in this moment, a lot of teachers fear the fascists
Yes.
because it's very hard to teach civic courage and to teach critical thinking in a political environment where teachers and both of those things are under attack. What would your advice to those teachers be?
And, I thought actually a long time about flipping the title because it is scary for teachers right now. And teachers feel quite alone right now. But, my advice is, I mean, it's kind of manyfold, as you could imagine. But my first piece of advice is build community. Don't do things alone. I know sometimes teaching is a really lonely job. Even though you're with lots of kids. How many times till late into the night were you grading papers?
Mm-hmm.
How many times late into night? Or for me, I did the 5 o'clock in the morning routine. Like I would be getting up like with a start at 5 o'clock in the morning to either finish the work I hadn't done the night before.
Mm-hmm.
So or all day Sunday. Like Sunday became my day. And it's pretty lonely when you're doing all of this and really trying to meet kids' needs and really trying to figure out what your lesson plans are and grading papers and all of this. So I keep saying to people, build community, whether it's with if you're a second grade teacher, with the other second grade teachers, build community within your school, build community within your union, but really have a group of people that your friendship circle, your work circle, have that. That's really important. That really pushes back at the fear and the isolation and the apathy. And the second thing I say to people is don't try to save the whole world. Don't try that you alone are going to fix everything. Like, look, that's what the strongman wants to do. He alone, is the one who's going to fix everything, even though, frankly, strongmen actually exacerbate problems. They don't fix them. And look at this one right now. He's settling scores as opposed to solving problems like the grocery prices in America or healthcare in America. The second thing is everyone can do something. No one can do everything, but everybody could do something. And what I'm seeing is that when people do something and they do it together with others, it creates courage. It creates a sense of, I can actually fight for the things I believe in. I don't have to feel like it's hopeless. And so those are the two pieces of advice that I give to people all the time. And it can be at like how many teachers, how many went to No Kings? A lot. I mean, there were over 7 million people there. And you saw signs, you saw elderly women's signs sitting on lawn chairs, hanging out with their friends, basically saying, I didn't live this long to have a king. The founding
Exactly.
fathers, yes, they were all fathers, basically said, no, we fought a revolution not to have kings. And we, 249 years later, are like, no, no. So just even having some humor and some fun with these things, the signs were amazing. Celebrate the signs. It's courage, how we make courage and standing up and people not being alone, how we make that something where people really feel they're in community. That's my advice.
Now, in the process of teaching in a way that sustains democracy, you identify 4 pillars. Can you tell us a little bit about what they are?
So I identify that the book is kind of split up. Well, I do two 4 pillars. Now, part of this is, I'm a lawyer who's now in my 60s. Not and I forget sometimes what I've had for breakfast. So I kind of like thinking about either the C words or doing things in 4s or 3s. So what in terms of education, I do think, and a lot of people, and I'm sure Lisa, you get this question all the time, given who you are and what you've done in your life. How do we fix education? What do we have to do? And, we used to all talk in terms of pedagogy, which a normal human being cannot understand one word of what we're saying. So, I mean, just, and look, lawyers talk the same way and doctors talk the same way, but we don't get the respect that lawyers and doctors get. So in looking at what has happened, particularly post-COVID, what and COVID really broke us. I really think it broke society in very fundamental ways that nobody wants to even think about anymore because they don't want to think about COVID. And or they want to, whatever the shibboleth is, that, who closed schools? Did China start this? What we need to do is create a safe and welcoming environment from classrooms to campuses for our kids. So safe and welcoming. And the second thing we need to do is, because it's not just about well-being, as much as people can get their arms around well-being, that's important. And it's Maslow, it's primal. Like Maslow said, you're not going to get the bloom before you start with Maslow, as I can only say to a teacher. But the second piece is we have to make curriculum engaging and relevant. And it can't just be test, 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 because what we're competing with is this. We're competing with the cell phone. I mean, that's part of the reason that we are very much in favor of all these laws to make schools, distraction free, so that kids can look at each other like you and I are looking at each other, that we can think about the answers, not rush to text somebody. And so I think that we need to start thinking about what's the reasons that kids want to come to school? And can we match passion to purpose? So, in terms of just thinking about what we should be doing to strengthen, not abandon public schools, I think those four words give us a lot of heft in terms of what we need to do for our kids. In terms of what teachers actually do to fight either that the habits that they do all the time that actually effectively fight autocracy or dictatorship or kings or whatever is they actually I split that up into four as well, into four chapters in my book. And one, as any social studies teacher knows, I started with critical thinking, as you said before, because it's not just about memorization. You can actually use ChatGPT and find facts, but are they really facts or are they fiction? How do you actually know what's misinformation or disinformation? And how do you have enough information and enough skills about asking questions and understanding information and ferreting things out so that you can solve problems? So you can arrive at a conclusion that makes sense, that's not just spitting out something that, somebody else said. So that piece of critical thinking, the founders and the framers thought were absolutely essential to save us from kings. It was the bulwark of democracy. And then the second piece is that same kind of safe and welcoming, that same kind of way of in schools, we create pluralism. And the third is, what else do we do in schools? We build opportunity. Think about Johnson. Think about Chris Stewart, what his whole life. How do we make sure that kids who have been marginalized, how do we create opportunity pathways? Well, you have to level the playing field. That means when you're talking about opportunity for all, that means if kids are poor, if kids have special needs, we have to provide more for them. And the last piece was all of this stuff takes power. So gazillionaires have power. Most mere mortals don't. So they get power. Teachers get power through a union. So I tried to do both. What do we need to do in schools? But also, what long term are we doing to create the habits of democracy and looking at our country in terms of where the future needs to be, not looking, and this is the last thing I'll say to this question. Sorry, I'm answering it so
Oh,
long.
no.
But think about Donald Trump's whole anthem, "Make America Great Again," as opposed to it's looking to the past. School teachers look to the future. We look to the present. We try to help the present become the future. Why would we look to the past? Why are we not, as Americans, this kind of robust way of looking to the future and helping every single one of our kids be prepared for their future and their pursuits?
Absolutely, absolutely. And speaking of Trump and the actors around him, I'm wondering, as you know, we're talking about them in the framework of authoritarianism and what's been happening, and this group of political actors that's been pushing their way into schools. Um, how do you think they've been weaponizing the culture wars in schools and in education, or weaponizing the culture wars against public schools?
Well, they've told us. I mean, they don't do it often, but they've actually told us. And what Pompeo did was an example of what they told us. Let me tell you what they told us. I say it in the book. A guy by the name of Chris Rufo, who labels himself a conservative activist. That's his label for it. Said that to create universal vouchers, universal quote choice, you have to create universal public school distrust. And in the same speech to Hillsdale College, he said, and this is the college that Betsy DeVos basically has, basically funds. He said that you have to be ruthless and brutal at times. So they know what they're doing. And what they do is they kind of throw spaghetti at the wall. They figure out what creates tension or anxiety, what creates an anxiousness, what will create fear. Take the issue around trans kids. Now,
Mm-hmm.
if a parent, if people don't know anything about trans kids, if you don't have a kid who has is exploring that kid's sexuality and you haven't had to deal with that if you've grown up in a very heterosexual world, it is actually kind of anxiety provoking to try to deal with who your kid is, or if you don't know any kids who are trans or non-binary, what does it mean? What does that mean for your family? It's anxiety provoking. So what do? Weaponize it. They, instead of having some, there's a Yiddish word, Rachmanis, having some sense of a soul about, can we take care of kids who are trying to figure out who they are? Like, kids always try to figure out who they are. Can we have some sense of understanding about that? Instead, no, it's going to weaponize. And then what else did it weaponize? I remember during the 2024 election, saying to some parents who were believing the commercials that said a kid could come in female to a classroom or to a school, female in the morning and exits the school in the afternoon male. I'm like, we don't even have permission to give your kid an aspirin without calling you. Like, this is crazy. But that fear. And so you saw it in terms of CRT. I mean, what what second grade teacher in this environment knew, in 2020 knew what the word CRT meant?
None. Absolutely none.
So what did he say? Okay, we're going to take a word that nobody knows what it means, toxify it, and then say teachers are teaching it. So then us, what were we doing? We're answering the question, when did you stop beating your wife? Like, because there's no win to that answer. Oh
Mm-hmm.
no, we don't teach CRT. Like we don't even know what CRT is. And they're like, oh, see, they're admitting. And so it was crazy. And then what would happen is CRT is actually an important legal doctrine about looking at the effects of discrimination. So when somebody was saying, oh, we don't teach CRT, then what it says is that we're erasing history about, well, what about the effects of past discrimination? So they created it in a no-win situation to divide people.
And they've also made it everything CRT. Everything is
Everything.
CRT.
Yeah,
Everything that has
everything.
anything to do with race or discrimination is CRT.
Yeah. I mean, I took a course when I was in law school in the 1980s that Kim Crenshaw had not, been on the scene yet in terms of her work. But I remember reading stuff that Derek Bell had written and and doing that and looking at it and thinking about it about as a legal doctrine. But no teachers, not even AP Gov teachers teach that. But it was the
No.
divide. It was the divide. Just like, how do you make the word diversity, the word inclusion, or the word equity? How do how all of a sudden those words get weaponized? We 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 have diverse classrooms. We need to welcome all of our kids. So how do you not use those words? So it's this friction that gets created and the us versus them that gets created.
Absolutely. And then we have the social media disinformation that adds to it, where they amplify that message. And that's where everyone is seeing it, um, and amplifying their fears, whether it be parents,
Exactly.
community members, kids who are seeing these things, board members, that we're trying to beat this down, the fears down. And it's sometimes a really tough thing to win. Um, whether we're talking CRT or litter boxes in bathrooms or what?
Exactly, exactly. And then you're saying, no, of course we don't have litter boxes, but you're engaged in that conversation. But I would say this is why I so admire teachers, whether they are my members, whether they were my colleagues, whether they are NEA members, whether they're teachers in private schools, because teachers basically take everything that society throws at them and they have to navigate it. And no one becomes a teacher if you don't want to make a difference in the lives of kids. Now, could we do things better? Yes, of course. That's why I often say we have to strengthen, not abandon public schools, not just protect what happens right now. We can't be in a situation where we're either condoning cruelty or broken status quo. We always have to be trying to figure out how to do better so that we help all kids succeed and help all kids be prepared for their future. But that's what teachers do regardless of the environment. And so that's why I try to create a warning to say, no, we don't want fascism here. These are the behaviors of this is how you describe. Let me describe fascistic behavior, but also what teachers do each and every day, intentionally or unintentionally, to counteract it.
Would you say that that is where you find the hope for American
Yes,
education?
yes. I find the hope in American education every time I walk into a school. Every time I see from the school secretary in the office with that big smile or basically telling you what to do and how to do it, to the school lunch worker, to the bus driver, to the teacher in whatever classrooms they are, to the paraprofessional reading or helping with manipulatives with a kid with special needs, watching the work of nation building, of future building, of watching, and I'm sure you've had this too, in my own teaching, that sense, that aha moment. And listening to teachers telling me about the aha moments they have with kids. That's where I see the hope. And how do we create, how do we fight for these folks to be able to empower kids so that kids sees their own future? That is the promise of America. And that is the hope and the promise I fight for every day.
Absolutely. What do you hope your readers, whether they're teachers, parents, policymakers, what do you hope that they'll do differently after having read your book?
I want them just to think. I don't need them to say they agree with me. I want them to see that there's another side to answer the question why this stuff is going on, why, I mean, you and I know the history of how vouchers started. It started in the wake of Brown versus Board of Education in segregated schools. So, and in trying to fight integration. And so there was a sense of white parents deserve choice so they don't have to have integrated schools. So I may know the history. Other people may not know the history. I don't begrudge them not knowing the history, but I want them to say when they see that people are defunding public schools or smearing teachers, I want them to say, oh, there may be another reason for that. It may be because whoever is doing it doesn't want us to help kids learn how to think. It may be because people don't want the community building, the pluralism building, the habits of democracy that a public school represents. I just want them to say, oh, maybe there's another reason. And the second thing I really, really want is I want people to respect teachers. I want them to respect who teachers are and what they do, because people go into our profession to make a difference in the lives of others. And that should be respected, not reviled. So you don't have to agree with me. Just think, oh, maybe there's another reason. And just respect the people who teach in our classrooms every single day.
A little bit of that critical thinking coming through, like ask
Correct.
why and who benefits. from attacking the
Exactly.
teachers? Who benefits from defunding and destroying the public school system? Um,
Exactly.
if you circle around that, you'll find your answer. And
Exactly right.
I know you've got
Get
to get
people to,
going.
it's like, get people to think that I'm
Yes,
not giving them the answer, but let them engage in the process to get to an answer.
absolutely. And I wish we had more time to talk because I have so many more things I'd like to ask you, but I know you do have to get going. One last thing for you. If you can write one thing on every American classroom wall, what would that be?
Believe, explore. I know there's not one. Be curious, be courageous, have faith, have agency.
Mm. And I'm going to take that to be for students and teachers, right?
Yeah, both for students and teachers, that together in America, we can accomplish what is impossible to do alone. What, why the Norwegian teachers wear a paperclip? For education and for community.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time. It's been an honor to talk to you today about your book.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And thank you for reading it.
Oh, absolutely. And for anyone out there, please do get yourself a copy of Why Fascists Fear Teachers by Randi Weingarten. You can get it in all the places where you normally buy your books. It is a great read. It is heartwarming with stories from teachers. It is informative. It is relevant right in the moment today. And you'll be glad you read it. And if you like this conversation, want to hear more like it, do like, subscribe, and share with all of your friends. And we'll see you next time on Always Learning.